The views expressed by the speakers of CamaPlan podcasts are those of the speakers only and may not reflect those of Cama, its members, or employees. Cama does not guarantee the accuracy of information provided by these speakers. Professional advisors should be consulted before implementing any options presented. Cama absolutely does not endorse or recommend any individual or organization, including the speakers. Cama, its members, and employees do not accept liability for losses and or damages arising from errors or omissions within, reliance upon, or any use of the information provided by the speakers. Individuals are strongly encouraged by Cama to conduct their own due diligence before making any investment choices. Cama does not act as, nor offer the services of, an investment advisor, CPA, realtor, or attorney. If tax, legal, accounting, investment, or other similar expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional should be sought. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Road to Financial Freedom, a podcast that allows experts to share their stories and secrets to unlocking their financial independence. This podcast is brought to you by CamaPlan, a self-directed IRA administrator in Ambler, Pennsylvania, that is focused on educating investors with different ways to grow their retirement savings faster through alternative investments. And once again, I'm sure you know the drill by now, we are continuing to record our podcast remotely. I'm Jess Jones, a CamaPlan team member and your podcast host. Today's guest is famously known as the Tax Lien Lady. She is also a best-selling author whose articles on tax lien and tax deed investing have been featured in online magazines and major real estate investing websites. Her contribution to the investing world has not only earned her the reputation of being the most trusted authority on tax lien investing in the country, but her education tools have helped thousands generate high returns without the high risk by better understanding this uniquely powerful type of alternative investment. Please welcome Joanne Musa to our podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Joanne.
Well, thank you for having me, Jessica. This is an honor. I am a longtime friend of CamaPlan. I have had an account. I'm a customer. I have had an account with CamaPlan for a long time. So I'm honored to be here today.
Well, thank you again. And I'm really excited to get to know some more about you, too. So let's get started and start by telling us a little bit more about, your background, Joanne, where you were born, grew up, where you went to school and studied, things like that.
Well, I was born in New Jersey, born and bred in New Jersey. I was actually born in Overlook Hospital in Summit, New Jersey. I grew up in Millburn, which is Short Hills is part of Millburn, and there are a lot of celebrities that live in Short Hills, but I am not from Short Hills. I grew up in Millburn, which is the other side of the tracks. Working class family. And that's where I grew up until I was 18. My parents moved out to White House Station, and I lived there until I got married. When I was first married, we lived in Flemington. And where I went to school and studied, I went to school for biochemistry. I went to Rutgers. I'm a Rutgers alumni. And I got an undergraduate degree in biochemistry. And what I really wanted to do at the time, I was a bodybuilder. I was studying nutrition. And I thought I would go on and get a master's degree in nutrition. Well, that never happened. I got married and had kids. I was 27 by the time I graduated because I went to work and went to school part-time. I graduated from University College. So that was part of Rutgers University. And how I got involved in tax lien investing, because, obviously I didn't go to school for anything
Right, exactly. It seemed like there was a pretty hard pivot there. So I'm interested to see, where that change happened and, how you went from what you were studying to what you now do.
Well, at the time I was a personal trainer, and I was actually working. The reason that it took me so long to get my undergraduate degree is I was working for a medical device company. So I went to school nights, and I left my job to become a personal trainer because I thought with what I knew about fitness and nutrition, I could help people never need the surgeries that the company I worked for depended on, that we were making devices for these surgeries that, of course it was to help people, but I thought I could help people never need those surgeries. So I stopped working for the medical device company that I was working for at the time and started my personal training business. And then I was also an athlete myself. I started Olympic style weightlifting when I was in my 30s. and pregnant with my third child.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was spending a lot of time in the gym. And then as my children were growing up, I was also coaching weightlifting. So I was spending a lot of time in the gym and got tired of spending all that time in the gym. I felt like I was living in the gym and I wanted to do something else. The other thing that had happened earlier is that my husband and we bought our first condo. We moved in a couple of weeks after we had our first baby, and then my husband lost his job and was unemployed for a while. So we got into a lot of debt. As you know, we struggled through that time. I was self-employed, and I had just had my first C-section. I had 3 C-sections.
Wow.
And so each time I had a C-section, I was a personal trainer. I couldn't work for a while. So while I was healing. So we struggled, and I knew that there had to be a better way. So I educated myself about finance because I knew nothing when I got involved with tax lien investing. I knew nothing about finance or investing or real estate. The only experience I had with real estate was when we bought our first condo, which, by the way, we bought in 1988, at the end of 1988. And then the following year, the rug got pulled out from under us, much like what happened a while ago with the real estate industry when we had what I termed negative equity for a while in our condo. So I knew there had to be a better way, and I wanted to learn how to invest. I wanted to get out of debt, which the way I did this, we sold our condo. And when we sold our condo, and this was when I moved in, we had our first baby. And when I sold, this was like 12 years later, I had 3 growing boys in a 2-bedroom condo.
Wow.
And this was now 2001. And prices were skyrocketing. We couldn't buy anything at the time where we lived. There was just nothing available. We even just wanted to rent and couldn't find something that we could afford. We also did not have the credit, the income, the know-how at that time. Now I've gotten real estate investing coaches. I've learned how to invest with other people's money, how to find deals. But back then, I didn't know, but I thought the way to get wealthy was through real estate. And I went to some foreclosure sales. I went to the sheriff's sales, and I was willing to bid up to $200,000 at one sale that I went to, and actually up to $300,000 at another sale that I went to. And I couldn't touch a small distressed house for that much money in the 2 or 3 counties that I went to these sales. The prices were going crazy. So I thought, well, if I can't buy my own property, I am going to invest in real estate. And what happened was we wound up buying our first property out in Pennsylvania. We were actually looking for an investment property, and when we saw what we could buy with our money, we actually bought a property to live in, and we've lived here since 2005. But even before that, when I couldn't get into the real estate market, and when we couldn't get foreclosure properties at the foreclosure sales, I thought, okay, I'm going to learn how to buy pre-foreclosures from people that are being foreclosed on or that are in danger of being foreclosed on. But back then it was easy to get a loan, not like it is today. It was very easy to get a loan. And I would be dropping off letters in people's mailboxes, and you know what? Their mailboxes would be full of other people's postcards wanting to do the same thing, buy their property and save them from foreclosure. But the only response I got from what I sent out was a pretty nasty phone message. So that deterred me right away. And I was never one who liked to negotiate. My husband he brokered construction equipment. He was good at negotiating, but that's something I was kind of shy when it comes to talking to people and negotiating people. So that would always stop me from investing in real estate. But then I read a couple of books that your listeners might have heard about. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Remember, this is the early 2000s by Robert Kiyosaki, and Multiple Streams of Income by Robert Allen. Both of those books mentioned tax lien investing. I had never heard of it before. I had no idea what it was. And they mentioned it, but they really didn't give you a good description of how it worked and how you could do it. So I looked to educate myself. There was one book out in print at the time, The 16% Solution. When I got a hold of it, it was already a few years old. It was already about 15 years old. And it didn't have any specific information for New Jersey, because where I was living at the time in New Jersey, they do it quite different than every other state. As a matter of fact, in most states, they have these big county tax sales. Well, in New England and in New Jersey, it's all done on the township level. They don't have big county tax sales.
Mm-hmm. So when you say you have a fear, like not fear of negotiation, I shouldn't say fear, but you were initially adverse to it. When people say, foreclosure auctions and things like that, I initially think of people yelling, shouting, interrupting each other, calling out number. And it seems like one big loud negotiation. How did you, initially overcome some of that? Is it actually like that? And, how did you find your way to negotiating your way through an auction like that?
Oh, good question. Well, the tax sale auctions are very organized. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you do shout out numbers, for instance, in the tax lien auctions in New Jersey. But there's no negotiating involved. Everything is already set. The only negotiating is who's going to win the bid. And so, yes, you shout out numbers at the sale, but it's not like you have to negotiate with somebody.
Right.
And once you have the lien, everything is cut and dry. And in most states, it's the tax collector that handles everything. You never talk to the property owner.
Got it. Mm-hmm. So that clears it up a lot. I think what people hear auction and immediately a certain idea of what the event is like comes to mind. So I think that it's interesting, that these are actually a little bit more organized than some of the shouting chaos you would think of if you see like an auction on TV or something like that.
Yeah, some of these auctions are actually online.
Oh, interesting. Mm-hmm.
Now, when I started in New Jersey, they were all live. There was nothing online, but today, quite a few New Jersey municipalities do online auctions.
Wow. And so I guess then they were kind of ahead of the curve for everything going remote, everything going online for COVID-19 in terms of, that business was able to continue to function and work.
Right. Yes. Some municipalities were actually able to have their tax sales in spite of COVID because many of the government offices were shut down. Mm-hmm. So that did postpone many sales, even if they were online, but some of them that were online went ahead anyway. And many more towns went online because they could still have their sale. There are still some live sales in New Jersey, which I like, I prefer. I don't like the online sales because they're more competitive.
Definitely, I think immediately of, eBay. And there was a period of time where both my parents were really into eBay, and just the competitive nature of that alone online made me stressed out. So I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Just like watching a parent.
These live tax sales are competitive enough.
Right, exactly. The added pressure of not knowing what someone's about to do next on the other side of the computer gives me so much stress. I can't imagine. So, but I think that's really interesting. So, I mean, thank you for sharing. And you've already been pretty open and candid about, some of the things that worked and didn't work and some of the early successes and failures that you had early on as an investor. Is there a specific, story or incident besides the unpleasant phone call from the note you had put in a mailbox? Is there any other specific stories that come to mind? And what are some of the big, lessons or takeaways that you have from early on as an investor that have informed how you invest and how you educate investors now?
Well, I can tell you there's the one most important thing I've learned from this business is you must pay your taxes, your property taxes, before anything else. Mm-hmm. Because in some states, like in New Jersey and in other tax lien states, they will sell a lien on your property, and that gives you time. Tax lien sales are really a very good thing for the property owner because it gives them time to come up with the taxes. They're going to pay very high penalties and interest rates for the privilege of doing that, but at least they don't get their property sold out from under them. In states like the state where I live in now, in Pennsylvania, if you don't
Mhm.
pay your taxes after a year of not doing that, in the next year, they will sell your property right out from under you in a
Wow.
tax sale.
Uh-huh.
So the one thing that I learned from getting involved in this business is that it's important to pay your taxes even before you pay your mortgage. And that's assuming that your mortgage company isn't paying them. If your mortgage company is paying them, then you don't have to worry about it, obviously. But so that's the one thing that I learned from this business. Now, there are a lot of other things that I learned from mistakes that I had made.
Mhm.
And the one big mistake that new investors make, and that I make from time to time, even now, is not looking at the property first
Mhm.
before you buy a tax lien. Even though you're not buying the actual property, you're putting a lien on the property. And that's something that we might talk about, Jessica, is what exactly is a tax lien?
Yeah, you know what? It definitely is something that I had heard about a lot when I first started here at CamaPlan, but not necessarily something. Even still, like I feel like the details for myself are a little bit muddy. So if you want to pivot and go into explaining what exactly a tax lien is and how it functions in terms of investing, I would be more than happy to hear from you about it.
Okay, great. I'd love to do that and explain why it's such a good investment. So, first of all, as I just said, even though you're not buying the property, you're paying somebody's taxes and putting a
Mhm.
tax lien on the property. And your tax lien comes before any other lien on the property, even a mortgage, anything else that is not a government lien. Your tax lien is considered a government lien, a municipal lien, even though you have it recorded in your name. In New Jersey, in some states, you don't have to record them, but in New Jersey, you do. You do in some states, you do have to record your liens. So once you go to the auction and you buy a lien, you're the successful bidder. And different states will bid different things. Some will bid down the interest rate. Some will bid up the price of the lien, the amount of the lien. And once you are the successful bidder and you get a lien, in New Jersey, you have to record that with the county clerk. You do get that recording fee back. You don't get interest on the recording fee, but you do get your recording fee back if and when the lien redeems. So you actually get your money. Now, why would you want to pay somebody's taxes and put a lien on the property? Because why should they pay you if they didn't pay their taxes? Well, the reason that they will pay you is because they have a certain amount of time to do that. And if they don't, you can actually foreclose on the property and get the property. So that's leverage.
Mhm.
Uh, Tax lien investing is not really a good way to get the property because, hey, let's face it, you paid the taxes, and that, if you did your homework right, that's a lot less than the property's worth.
Right.
So if you're buying these tax liens in good areas, in areas where the real estate is valuable, and of course you want to make sure that the real estate is valuable before you buy that lien, then it is going to redeem. Most likely, like 99% of the time, those liens are going to redeem and you're going to get your money. Now, the interest rate that you get on these tax liens is a lot more than you could get in the bank right now. As a matter of fact, it's a lot more than you could get in the bank a few years ago
Mhm.
because many of these, for instance, in New Jersey, the statutory rate is 18%. Now, that does get bid down at the tax sale, but even if you buy a lien at 0%, once you're the lien holder, you get to pay the subsequent taxes. And guess what? You get that statutory rate on all the subsequent taxes that you pay. So
Mhm.
it's a high yielding investment with real property backing it up, because if they don't pay you, and each state has a different time allowed for that, what we call the redemption period. In New Jersey, where I started, it's 2 years. If you don't get paid in 2 years, then you get to foreclose on that property. So that's real leverage to get paid. And if you do get foreclosed on that property, it doesn't matter if there's a mortgage on there. I mean, the mortgage company has the right to pay you off and redeem it.
Mhm.
And if they don't, they have nothing to say about it because you are a super lien and you're ahead of them. That's basically what a tax lien is. And I hope that I've explained it in a way that it's easily understandable.
Right. It definitely contextualizes it for me. So I have a couple of questions. And basically, the main question I guess I have is, is the goal to have, the lien redeemed, or would the goal be for some people who purchase these to foreclose on the property? Or is that not always the goal? It's just kind of one of those added, collateral things that may happen if it's not redeemed. Also, another question I have is the property holder, if they're unable to pay the taxes that year, someone buys the lien on their property, are they still living in the property? Are they the one paying back the interest? So those are my initial questions on that.
Two great questions. Okay, let me answer your first question first about what the goal is here. Is it to get the interest on your money, or is it to get the property? Or is getting the property like the icing on the cake that just happens once in a while? With tax lien investing, I will say that most of the time you're going to get the interest on your money and not the property. However, once in a while, if you do enough investing, once in a while that might happen. And that's like the icing on the cake, that's a big payoff. But for some people, they don't want the headache of doing that. So their goal is just to get the high interest on their money. For people who do want to get the property, there are other investment vehicles. Remember, I mentioned before that in my state, in Pennsylvania, they don't sell tax liens. What they do is they actually sell your property. And so states that do this are called tax deed states. And they have tax deed sales. So here in Pennsylvania, I can actually go to a tax sale and bid for the property and get a deed to the property and record that deed and own the property. So if your goal is to get the property, then I would suggest that you go to the tax deed sales in states that sell those instead of the tax lien sales in states that do the tax liens. And there is something called a redeemable tax deed, which is kind of in between. You go to the tax sale and you bid up the amount of the taxes. You're basically bidding up the price of the property because you're buying the deed, but the owner still has a redemption period where they could pay it off. But if they don't pay it off during that redemption period, at the end of that period, you get the deed. In most states that do this, you don't have to foreclose. You already have the deed. You just record it, or the deed will be issued to you at the end of the redemption period. So those are called redeemable deed states. And we could talk about this a little bit later, but I do have a workshop coming up just on those redeemable deed states and what states sell redeemable deeds and what the impact of COVID has been on those redeemable deed sales.
Well, great. Thank you. That answers that question for me for sure. And then I know there was a second one in there. So if you remember what it was, because honestly, I think I'm so, engrossed in the information you're giving me. I was like, what was my second question? But I think I remember it now. Is it sort of like a note, this type of investing, in that, you're setting terms for the property owners to be able to pay back property taxes, and are they still living in the property, or is it different than, you're setting the terms for how payments are going to be made in terms of, when this gets redeemed and how it gets redeemed?
Okay, let me make a couple of things clear. You don't set any terms. The terms are set by the state statutes. And it's the tax collector or county treasurer, depending on what state it is, that sets the terms. So you don't set any terms. You don't even have any contact with the property owner in most cases for tax liens.
Right.
And these
I think you had mentioned that.
Yeah, and properties could be occupied or they could be vacant. Some people just give up on a property, leave it, and stop paying the taxes. And basically, they don't want the property anymore. And that might be a property that you would get, and that is vacant. You still have to wait out the redemption period before you get it. But there's another point that brings up that I want to make clear also, is that you don't get paid on your investment until the property owner decides to redeem the lien. And they do that through the tax collector or county treasurer or whoever is responsible for doing the tax sale and collecting the delinquent taxes. Okay. So it's not like you get paid monthly or any kind of interim payments on your money. You don't get paid until the owner comes and redeems the lien. So
Got it.
the interest is accruing, but you don't get it until they redeem. Okay.
Great.
At which time you get your capital back, you get your interest, and any penalties that are owed you would get back at that time. And of course, if they don't pay, that's when you would either get the property if it was a redeemable deed, or go ahead and do a foreclosure if it's a tax lien. So that brings up another question. What happens if people are still in the property? Well, then once you get the property, then it is your responsibility to evict whoever's there. Or if there are renters in the property, you could always keep them in there and have them pay you rent. Even if the owner is still in the property and you want to keep them there and have them pay you rent, you can do that. It's not like when you get a foreclosure on a short sale from a bank and you're not allowed to do that. Then you have to evict who's ever there, because a bank would consider that unethical.
Right.
But in this case, once you own the property, you could do whatever you want.
Got it. Okay. Well, that definitely clears a lot of things up for me, because I know one question that came up was, okay, well, how does this differ from, let's say, a note, based on what I, was initially hearing just from what I'd heard through the grapevine at CamaPlan. So thank you for clarifying, and thank you for, your honesty and your detail to that. And then I guess the one other question I do have is, you mentioned there's a bit of a waiting period in terms of, the property owner has to redeem the lien. So about on average, how long does this process in total take?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, each state has a different redemption period, and some states it's as short as 6 months, and in others it can be 3 years. Okay. Remember, I mentioned New Jersey was 2 years, so they're kind of in the middle. A lot of redeemable deed states, it's 1 year. So it can be anywhere. And the shortest one that I know of are special sales in Indiana, where it's only 4 months. So it can be anywhere from 4 months to 3 years.
Great. Okay. So that definitely ties everything from the beginning of this recording together in a way that, at least I understand now. So I think that our listeners will definitely be able to understand based on, your great explanations of this, Joanne. So thank you. Let's talk some more about your brand. What does the Tax Lien Lady do? Who is a typical client of Tax Lien Lady? And, how are they benefiting from tax lien and tax deed investing?
Okay, let me tell you first what the Tax Lien Lady doesn't do. I don't invest for people, because I have people that ask me all the time. They want to give me money and have me invest for them. That is not something I do. If I did, that would be my full-time job. And I wouldn't be able to have my website, taxlienlady.com, and help the amount of people that I help by teaching them how to invest in tax liens. So what I do is basically, I'm a teacher and a coach, and I help people learn how to do it themselves. I have coaching clients that I coach through it. I have students that just buy my courses and learn how to do it themselves and go do it themselves. And then I have students that are members of my Tax Lien Profits Accelerator, where I do a group coaching call every month, and I have a training every month, and I have tools to help them find out about tax sales and do their due diligence. So I have an assortment of resources and learning materials at taxlienlady.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. It sounds like, your Tax Lien Lady shares a lot of overlap with CamaPlan's philosophy too, and that, we're not selling you anything. We're not pushing any investments onto you. It's more, you're self-directing your investments. You're coming to us with, here's what I want to do. And we're facilitating those transactions as a neutral third party. But the educational angle is something that, we really focus on, just to educate investors on, this is an option for you if you're interested in it. And I think the education that you're providing to your students and to the folks you coach sounds like it could be really beneficial for them to really understand, that there's a certain amount of due diligence that comes with this investing and all those sorts of things. So that's great to hear. What exactly, you've created a brand and a reputation as, quote unquote, the Tax Lien Lady. So what was your journey like and experience like to building a brand? Because I can imagine, based on what you're saying, or what you said in the beginning, you have personal training experience. And I can imagine that, being a personal trainer kind of helped or had some overlap with coaching folks with tax lien investing.
Yeah, as it turns out, I love teaching. I remember when I was a kid with my brothers and sisters, I'm the oldest out of 6.
Wow.
And when we would play school and I was always the teacher.
Oh yeah. As the older sibling, yeah, it's that you're always the mother, the teacher. Yep.
So I do love helping people and coaching them and teaching them. I love answering questions. I have a Facebook Live, a free Facebook Live every Tuesday. It's normally at 2:00 Tuesday afternoon, but for this month I've changed it to 1:00. And I love researching and finding out things too. So I like doing the research and then making that information available to my subscribers and my students. But when I started out, this was really a good old boys club, a good old boys network. Even going to the tax sales, sometimes I was the only woman in the room or one of the only women in the room.
Mm-hmm.
There were, even back when I got started, remember this was like 2002 when I got started, there were even back then maybe a couple of tax lien investing funds, hedge funds that were in the business. But now there are many more than were in the business when I got started. And there are more women who are bidders working for these companies. But back when I got started, I was one of the very few women bidders at these sales. And then when I started my business, I was the only woman with a presence online about tax lien investing. Now I have seen one or two, but they don't have the brand that I do. They're not out there as much as I am. And I don't know why that is. I know that when I started, I had good mentors to help me get my presence out there on the web. And I met the right people and networked with people that helped me too. So it was kind of a journey of breaking through into a man's world, basically.
Yeah, definitely. So like when you say the tax lien lady for, at least for a point in time, you were the tax lien lady. So it's really interesting.
And there's a story too about how I got that name. When I first started investing, what happened as I go back to my story that I was telling you before about how I got started, I really didn't tell you how I got started in tax lien investing, just how I came to find out about it. But what I found out was in New Jersey, remember I said that in a lot of states, they have these big county sales, and in New Jersey, every town, every municipality has their own tax sale. Well, there's over 550 municipalities in New Jersey, and each one can have their own tax sale. They have it once a year, but it doesn't have to be they don't all have them at the same time of year. So it's spread out throughout the year. At any given day in New Jersey, there could be a few tax sales in different parts of the state. So I just started going to these tax sales. And when I started this, I lived in Hunterdon County, and then I moved to Essex County. So I went to tax sales in different counties, but I really started out where I lived at first was in Hunterdon County. So I started out there, and I kept running into this other gentleman who was also trying to figure this out. And we kept running into each other at these sales. And one day he took me out to lunch, and we actually took a couple of the professional bidders out to lunch with us to try and figure out how this works. And then he asked me if I would work for him. Well, unbeknownst to me, he was a millionaire or a multimillionaire that owned a few businesses in New Jersey. And he had a lot more than I did to invest, and he was after bigger liens. So I could work for him and help him build a larger portfolio of larger liens and still build up a small portfolio of smaller liens for myself. So I started working for him. In the process of working for him and building his portfolio, I hired 5 other people to go into 5 counties, because on any given day, there could be like 8 tax sales all at the same time in different places in New Jersey.
Right.
And I hired these, and they were all women that I hired, by the way, and I would train them on how to do their due diligence, how to bid at the tax sale. And I also helped him develop a software for tracking these liens and keeping track of his portfolio. And I also used
Oh,
it for my own
interesting.
portfolio.
Uh-huh.
But he would call me the Tax Lien Lady. So when I
Wow.
started my
Uh-huh.
business, that's the handle that I used, and it just took off.
Oh, absolutely. With a story like that, I feel like it's a perfect name for, your company and for to brand yourself with. So that's a very interesting story, and it's so cool to hear how, you started out in biochemistry and ended up as the tax lien lady. Very, very interesting. So thanks for sharing all of that, Joanne. I'm interested in, you talk about the gentleman that you first partnered with when you were first going to these tax lien sales. So were there any other early influences or folks who inspired you to get involved in this type of investing or shift gears to the world of entrepreneurial endeavors?
Well, there wasn't much available at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But what I realized when I started going to these sales in New Jersey, and then I realized there were people all over the country and even all over the world that wanted to learn about this.
Right.
And it's very state specific. So I started my website, and I never imagined that I would be a writer. And I never imagined that I would have a website and do what's called infopreneuring. But I had bought this package from Robert Allen, this multiple streams of income package. And it had all these trainings. And what I really wanted to do was learn how to make money from the stock market and from real estate. And when that didn't work out as well as I thought, then I picked up those other books that I thought, oh, I'm never going to do this,
Mm-hmm.
like infopreneuring and, having that taught you how to have your own website, make money from a website, write. So I started my own website. I started writing a blog. I started interviewing other experts from around the country. And then my website, taxlienlady.com, kind of took off. I wrote my first ebook,
Mm-hmm.
and with what I learned from this program that I bought from Robert Allen. And I had some really good mentors in that program. And one of them is Jeanette Cates. She was known as the Tech Tamer. So I took classes from her on how to basically have my website. And at the time, I had a friend who was an IT person. So at first, I had her do my website, but I actually had to tell her about SEO back then
Right.
because she was
Wow.
an IT person for a
Uh-huh.
corporation. She didn't
Uh-huh.
deal with that stuff. And, then later on, I found other people to help me with it. And yeah, it was a progression how I got started. But really, that's what started me out, and something I thought I would never do. And
Right.
and eventually I wrote a book and that went to a bestseller on Amazon. So who knew?
Right, exactly. And I mean, I think, you describe in the beginning, you did a lot of self educating and pursuing the knowledge that you needed to get better at this, get stronger at this, learn more about it so that you could go to these auctions and know what to do. But now you're a best-selling author and speaker and you write your blog and you're also investing on top of that. You said you have an account with CamaPlan. So I'm just wondering, how do you find balance in all of this? How do you maintain all of it? I know a lot of these things probably overlap, but where do you find that balance center in juggling all of these tasks that you have now?
Well, it's funny because, sometimes you concentrate on one area and then
Mm-hmm.
you let that go once that gets going, and then you go on to another area. So there are times when I'll go to the tax sales, and then there are times when I will concentrate more on coaching or my website or on writing. So, you can't do everything all the time.
Right, exactly. It's like a somewhat comforting thing to hear, though, because I think a lot of people, especially, I'm in my mid 20s, and a lot of people my age are under the impression that if you're not doing everything at the same time, you're not trying hard enough. At least that's what I see on social media, things like that. And I try to ignore it, but you do that thought kind of is almost like insidious in your head, and you think you're not doing enough because you're not doing everything all at once at the same time. But I think time economy is so important for investing and just in general. Being able to spend your time wisely and focus on things and go back to things, come back and put them away for a bit. I think that's a great lesson.
Yeah, and I think you're doing the right thing. I think you really have to be focused on whatever it is you're doing and give that your full attention. And it's hard to do that when you've got all these different things going. So yes, I do have different things going. I don't have any tax sales I'm going to right now because, once you buy liens, then you get to pay the subsequent taxes to keep control of that property or to keep control of that lien. You don't want that same property to be sold in another tax sale the following year. So it's always good to pay subsequent taxes, especially in New Jersey where you get the statutory rate on of return on your subsequent tax payments. And some other states do that as well. So right now, I'm just concentrating on keeping up with those subsequent payments and doing the research to keep up on the changes that are happening with COVID and getting that out to my students and my members and doing the coaching. So, things change. And then in another, it is coming to a time where I will go to more tax sales. Usually, maybe I will start doing that by the end of this month, but November and December are really big months in New Jersey for New Jersey tax sales.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is a tax sale that I go to in New York. So New York is kind of funny because even though most of the counties sell deeds, the cities can do what they want. So some of the cities can have their own tax lien sales. So there is one of them that I found out about last year and did pretty well in that one that I'll probably go back to again this year. But I'm very selective about the tax sales that I personally go to. And I've been to tax sales in Indiana, Tennessee, New Jersey, Arizona. And in Arizona, I've been physically to Arizona, but not to a live tax sale. I have invested in an online tax sale in Arizona. And of course, New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And then I've helped people in other states, in Michigan, Maryland, Mississippi. So I've been to a lot of states, but now for my personal investing, I really narrow it down to only a couple of states that I like investing in. And even for my clients, I try to narrow it down to, the better states to invest in.
Right. Yeah. And I think, you kind of blazed a trail then for them in that you're able to go around to different states and learn what worked, what didn't work, what you like better, what you think probably leaves much to be desired in certain states. So that sounds great that you're giving back to your investment community in that way and to your students in that way. It actually kind of brings me to my next question, Joanne. Is there a tool or a resource that you're currently using to, keep up with your knowledge of tax liens and investing? I know you already touched on it, but is there a specific tool or resource that you can point investors in?
Yeah, there's actually 3. 2 that I provide to my clients, and one of those is tax sale resources, and that lets you know what tax sales are coming up around the country, lets you know news about tax sales, what's going on in the industry, and gives you links to county websites where you could find out more and where you could get the lists too. You could actually buy the premium lists from them. And all of my members get a free membership to that resource. And then I have another one that I use from a company called Lumentum, which is a due diligence tool that actually lets them see the properties in the tax sale and see the data from those properties. So those are the 2 resources that my students and my members get. But there's another resource, and that is the National Tax Lien Association. And the website for them is ntla.org. And they are an association that they started out really serving the institutional investors and the institutional tax lien and tax deed buyers. But now they're shifting and they're trying to serve the individual investor. However, for most individual investors, the cost to join them is quite high because remember, they started out for the institutional buyers. So it's not really a place where most individual investors would go to get information, but occasionally they have webinars and they have information on their site about investing, about tax lien investing. So I like to keep abreast of what they do, and I like to take part in the webinars that they do so that I can learn from them and take some of that information to my students and my clients.
That's great. And I think it's probably reassuring as your students and your clients to hear, you're still keeping up on your education and learning more about this alternative investment and what it has to offer, how it's changing, what's the new news about it. So I think that that's great to hear. On a more personal level, have you, read anything interesting in a book or watched anything that maybe started out as watching or reading for pleasure that you found interesting, but you ended up picking up on some tools or lessons from them that you're starting to share or implement in your teaching?
Well, I always like to interview people from different aspects of wealth development. Like, for instance, CamaPlan. I'm going to have you guys come again on my wealth building webinars. I have something called wealth building webinars, and so I like to get people that have different aspects, that have different things to do with tax lien investing, not tax lien investing per se, but maybe like setting up a self-directed IRA, or insurance, or debt reduction, or other things that I have maybe used myself to help me with my finances. Because let me be totally honest. Remember, I told you I have no financial education other than investing in tax liens myself.
Right.
And my financial education is what I learned from these people. So that's how I get my financial education. And and, making money and investing money and managing money are two different things. And managing money is something that I need help with. So I go to the experts to learn how to do that. And I try to bring these experts in on those webinars. And I learn. And one of the things I learned is setting up a self-directed IRA. As a matter of fact, when I started this, I did not have a self-directed IRA. I didn't know anything about it. And I met Carl Fisher, who's one of the founders of CamaPlan. He actually contacted me, and we did a seminar together in New York for a real estate investing group in New York. And through my contact with him, that's how I started my first self-directed IRA account with CamaPlan.
Got it. Well, that's really interesting. And I think, the stories that you have to tell of how your life has led you to one direction or the other, no pun intended, with self-direction, but is very, very interesting. And I'm curious because I know we had talked about it before, and then we pivoted to kind of break down the definition of tax lien investing and what tax liens actually are. But, you had started talking about lessons you've learned, obstacles you've overcome. In your opinion, what do you think, or based on what you've learned and what you've gone through, what do you think has made a successful investor? And what are some things that new investors should avoid? What are some of the pitfalls to watch out for, maybe specific to tax lien investing or just investing in general, Joanne?
Well, there's one thing that I'd like to caution, a myth about tax lien investing that I'd like to expose. And there are some experts that will tell you, well, the tax sales are so competitive, don't go to the tax sale. There's so much left over. Get the leftovers from the county, because you could get them at the statutory rate, at the highest rate. There's no bidding. But that is really not a good option. It's not a good strategy. And the reason that it's not a good strategy is because maybe 20 years ago it was, because there was good stuff left over. But so many people have been touting tax lien investing, not only in the US, but around the world. And there's so many online sales, they are so competitive that anything that is left over is junk. There are a lot of junk properties that go into these tax sales. And even some of those get bought because people don't know what they're doing when they go to these sales. But almost all of what is left over in these sales is now junk properties. So some people make money doing this, but they spend a lot of time doing it. They know what they're doing. They know what is left over. The minute it's left over, they know about it and they buy it. So if you think you're going to go to a state a few months after the tax sale and get something that was left over in the last tax sale and make money on it, that's probably not true.
Right. It's like you were saying earlier, it's that, knowing the property, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea of you've mentioned, one of the big mistakes is know the property that you're investing in, and know the property before you put any bid in on anything.
Right, exactly. So you want to look at it first. Now, yes, you could look at it online, and if you're bidding online in a state far away, there are certain types of properties you can look at online and bid online, but it really is hard to do that with Google Maps without somebody actually on the ground looking at the property for you, because those pictures that you're seeing are not current. They could be a year old, they could be 3 years old, and in the meantime, that house could have burnt down, or there could have been some disaster that destroyed the property. So, things like the fires in California, things like, floods that happen in some of the coastal areas.
Right.
So, and if you're bidding on land, there are things that you just can't see in a satellite map. In satellite pictures. So it's really good to have somebody look at the property if you can't do it. So anyway, the most important thing is to do your due diligence before you bid. And believe me, there's times that I tell myself, well, I know the area, I know it's a good area, and I don't have time to go look at it now. I'll go look at it later. And there have been times, like just last year, I got burnt.
Right. Yeah.
Because I didn't follow my own advice.
And that happens, but and it's human. It happens, but it's it's a very good lesson, I think, that you're projecting now. It's to do your homework, do your due diligence, and know what you're doing before you make any snap judgments.
And along with that, there's also one other thing that I want to tell people, because when people start, they get a little bit too anxious about that, and they want to get the list like 2-3 weeks before the sale, or sometimes these lists come out 4 weeks before the sale, and they want to go look at the properties right away and do their due diligence right away. And what I learned when I first got involved with this is that is a big waste of time. A big waste of your time and your gas if you're driving around looking at properties, because half of those properties are going to be paid off by the day of the sale, because most of these counties, I mean, their whole idea is to get paid on the taxes. And so a lot of people will procrastinate and they won't pay until they have to. And so once that gets published in the paper, because they do have to publish it in the local paper that the property is going to tax sale, once people see that their property is going to tax sale, they will come up with the money to redeem it before it goes into the tax sale.
Right. So it's a lot of potential time wasting too. It sounds like, you're saying you're wasting your time, your gas, your energy on something. Because I know for me, like the idea of, the auction sound too competitive, or, I need to do all of my homework. I'm someone who probably overdoes their homework and gets over anxious about a lot of these things. So for me, like that would have been my first instinct too. So I think that's really interesting to hear.
And then a lot of people do too much due diligence for tax liens, because they have a list of all these properties that they're interested. Maybe they go look at them ahead of time, and now they want to do title searches on all those properties. Well, but what they don't understand is they've got to bid against other bidders to get those properties. And they might have a list of 20. They might only get 1 or 2. They might not get any, depending on how competitive the sale is. So you don't want to spend money doing title searches on tax lien properties.
Got it.
Now, if you're spending a lot of money on one lien, if there's a really big lien, then maybe, yes, you might want to do it before you spend a lot of money on that lien. But I typically don't do title searches on tax lien properties. I do for tax deed properties, but I'm not going to pay somebody else to do a title search. I will search the property records myself.
Got it. Yeah. So it seems like there are a lot of helpful little tips that people might not know about right away that you've probably educated a lot on your, your weekly webinars or your Facebook Lives, and things like that. The little things people just might not think of is, you can look these things up yourself if it's a tax deed property and that sort of thing. So thanks for sharing that. I think a lot of listeners, this will definitely quell, I think, a lot of listeners' anxieties or fears or confusions about tax lien investing. And I think, hearing from someone as seasoned as yourself, the Tax Lien Lady, is going to be really helpful for folks. So the one question we have a couple of questions we ask as we wind down from the interview, Joanne. The biggest question is basically, summing up everything we've talked about, we've covered a lot in this hour, but what would you say your keys to building wealth and unlocking your financial freedom are? So this doesn't have to be financial necessarily, but what is something that has informed the way that you look at success?
Well, I don't look at success as just financial or even mainly financial. To me, success is, how are you living? And are you happy? Are you healthy? That's really important. And
Mm-hmm.
what are you doing? What are you doing in the world? I have a monthly newsletter, and other than information on tax lien investing, because the name of the newsletter is Tax Lien Tips Newsletter, so of course it's on tax lien investing. But I sometimes have a section in there on wealth building from the other people that I interview, or from the information I've gained about that. But I also sometimes have a section in there about what I've learned about staying healthy and your health, because there's so much misinformation on that. And let's face it, if you
Yeah,
don't
you're
have your
right.
health, all the money in the world
Exactly.
sometimes can't buy it for you, because
Mm-hmm.
even though you have money to give to all these professionals, they don't always have the answers. Um,
Right.
and to me, what the most important thing to me was spiritual development. And I also have a section in my newsletter that talks about the books that I've read. My goal this year was to read 2 books a month, and a lot of those books that I read are spiritual. I normally read one spiritual book a month, and or one self-help book a month, and one book, on something that is academic or educational, or so. And sometimes I read a book just for fun, but I
Mm-hmm.
also put that in my newsletter as well. So success to me is to be happy, to live the kind of life that makes you happy.
Yeah.
And sometimes people that have a lot of financial success aren't happy. So that's not the be all and end all, although it does help.
Yeah.
Having money does help.
Exactly, exactly. But I think that that's really beautifully put. It's simple, but it's beautiful. A key to success can be being happy, and finding that for yourself is huge before you can even focus on, how much money I have, what am I going to do with it? This and that is, are you happy? And I think that that's really beautifully said. So thank you, Joanne.
Oh, you're welcome.
And thank you so much, for all of your time and your insight, and, for helping educate a lot of our listeners and myself included on, what tax lien investing is, what can be done with it, and all of the ins and outs. I think our listeners are going to learn a lot from what you've shared today, just like I have. So one last question before we go is, how can people reach out to you? Do you have any websites or social medias? Obviously, you've touched on a lot of them that listeners can use to get in touch with you.
Oh, of course. Thank you for asking. Well, they can go to my website, taxlienlady.com. And I also have a blog, taxlieninvestingtips.com, but you could get there from my website. And if you go to either my blog or my website, you'll see I have a free report called The 7 Steps to Building Your Profitable Tax Lien Portfolio. So anybody that's interested in that can download that report for free. When you do, you will get on my list and get my newsletter every month as well. And you can always unsubscribe whenever you get tired of my emails. I do send out emails at least once a week with news about the tax lien investing industry and tips. So that's how people can reach me. And if you're really interested in getting some more education, I do have a workshop coming up on October 18th is my next live virtual workshop. I do them about every other month. And the next one is on redeemable tax deeds. And there is a link to that on my website, taxlienlady.com. There's a menu on the top where you could find a link to my blog and to the live virtual workshop.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I will be sure to actually check those out myself, and I hope our listeners do the same. But As we've mentioned before, be on the lookout for any upcoming CamaPlan events featuring the Tax Lien Lady and Joanne, or, vice versa. Be on the lookout for CamaPlan at the Tax Lien Lady on some webinars then. But until then, everyone, thank you again for joining us this week on the road to financial freedom. You can tune in next week to hear more from experts who have paved their roads to financial freedom, or call CamaPlan today to learn more about how you can start to take control of your future wealth. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for tuning into our podcast. We truly hope that you're enjoying your ride along the road to financial freedom so far. If you like what you've heard and learned, or if you want to hear more about certain topics that we may have already covered or have yet to cover, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. We would love to hear any feedback from you so that we may continue to make our podcast the best that it can be for you, our listeners. Thanks again, everyone, and remember, tune in next week to the road to financial freedom.